Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. If you've been enjoying the show, please do consider contributing to our crowdfunder on the website Patreon. That's patreon.com/alwaystakeNotes.
If you support us on Patreon, you can get a great selection of rewards. One of them is a selection of successful magazine pictures from myself, Simon, and previous co-hosts and friends of the show. Simon's going to tell us a little bit about our latest donor.
It definitely is a little bit, because we don't know very much about her, but our latest Patreon is Ella Hill. We asked if she could tell us a bit of background about herself, and we never heard back. But nonetheless, Ella, we're very grateful for your support and also wish you all the best with your writing.
Very excitingly, we have just launched a new tier for our most generous supporters on Patreon, which are mini episodes from previous guests on the show. This week, you can listen to the wisdom of Laura Barber from Granta. Here's a tiny snippet.
And she also helped me find ways of expressing my criticism positively rather than negatively, so that the note would be a less devastating thing to receive. I still think of editorial notes, I still hope that my editorial notes land more like a hot air balloon gently drifting down to earth rather than like a rock being thrown at a writer. And I think that's related to...
Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Rachel and myself spoke to business journalist and author James Ashton.
We spoke to James about the art of the CEO interview, his book, The 9 Types of Leader, and what it's like to move from working at a newspaper to working freelance.
It's a great episode and we hope you enjoy it. James, it's great to have you on Always Take Notes. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to start out by asking about the business book as a genre of book. You're kind of the first sort of business author we've had on the show. And Rachel and I were interested in knowing about how does the genre work? How does it divide between CEO memoirs, how-to books, like how big a literary market it is? And also, what do you think are the kind of standout examples of that genre?
I think there are, well, thanks for having me on, first of all, Simon, and it's good to be the first of the genre, if you like. I think the way it splits, there are those how-to books, how to be an entrepreneur, how to improve yourself, and then I think there are those, what I would call the big corporate stories, maybe they're CEO memoirs, but more often I think the really good ones are the narrative, if you like, of a company within the context of an industry and how that affects the world around it. I think there's a fairly good split between the two. I think a lot of the publishers are really looking for those how-to books. I think the thing with if you might call it a corporate story or a personal memoir, they're always thinking, is this the sector that people want to read about? How does this work internationally? How does this work in America? As you will know, huge market for all books and particularly business books. And I think that's why you've seen in the last 5 to 10 years such a slew of the tech-focused books. So you've had big books you've had Ashley Vance on Elon Musk. You've had the Instagram book relatively recently that won awards, and Satya Nadella and so on and so on. So I think there's a real fascination with how they're making it work in Silicon Valley.
Do you get a sense that it's a market that still has room for growth, or do you think it's approaching saturation? I found a sort of stat that the British Book Awards receive more than 150 entries a year, which is sort of comparable to the number of entries that the Booker Prize gets. Struck me as quite a large volume.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a challenge for anyone who's consuming all media. There's quite a lot of stuff to get through. I think it's segmented quite well. So I think if you're particularly into leadership or banking or tech, then there'd be a set number of titles that you might go for. I think where some of the growth has come is the way that people are consuming these books, and I think audio has been very good for the business book market, because you can really, in the same way, kind of in competition with podcasts, I suppose, you can kind of soak up big ideas over 8 or 10 hours over the course of a week or 2 weeks.
And is the big hope that you get a book that gets on the Harvard Business School reading list, or are they kind of institutional imprimaturs for the most successful examples of this sort of thing?
I think, I mean, don't forget, I'm still fairly new to the books world. So I suppose the first hope is that the publisher accepts it. And then I think there are those obvious places that you go for acceptance. I think the FT McKinsey Business Book Award is a really good one and has built a reputation to it. But I think Harvard also as well helps. I think there are other awards, there are other acceptances, and I think also the book is a unit in itself. But also, I almost look at the book as a not quite a collection of columns, but a collection of ideas. And there are things in there in the ones that I've written, hopefully I can carry on disseminating over many, many months.
We are going to talk about your book a bit later on, but could we talk about your entry into journalism first? I'm particularly interested to hear more about the Huddersfield Daily Examiner's Junior Journalist Competition.
Well, I credit you for reading that section, and I was just checking some of the facts with my dad earlier on. So look, we are always a newspaper family. My dad is a 2 newspaper a day man. He was then, and he still is now. And actually, he worked at the Examiner. I checked the facts earlier. He was an apprentice compositor for 2 years, and he quit because he had to work Saturdays and he wanted to play football. And actually, it was the Examiner ran this competition. So I was maybe 13, 14, and literally the junior journalist competition was they printed an empty grid. And the challenge for individual kids or for schools was fill the grid, and it was as simple as that. And I entered through the school and also individually. You had to go out into the town, talking to friends and talking to people, finding stories, making judgments. This works on the front page. I remember interviewing a great school friend of mine he'd been a really great swimmer, and his knees had gone. I think for training seven days a week, his knees had gone. So I remember my back page headline, the sports section, was something like "Retired at 13." And and if I'd have known then, I was always destined to spend some time at the Daily Mail.
It's interesting.
And I think.
Sorry, go ahead, James.
I was going to say, and I think that's where the bug came. It was also a time, if you may not remember, but this series on ITV called Press Gang, it made journalism pretty cool for kids, I think, at the time.
I actually was in Halifax for a week last year doing this big COVID contact tracer story. So it's a part of the world I saw a little bit of then. But I wanted to ask you, and this is something we ask everyone about the period they grew up in. So how was the media landscape then when you were starting out? Maybe not when you were 13, but when you were in your 20s and so forth. And what we ask people to do is to look back with absolutely no rose-tinted spectacles on. So, don't give us a sort of huge encomium about huge expense accounts and lavish Fleet Street lunches. Like, what was good in those days? What was bad? Like, just tell it as straight as you can, really.
I mean, which job in particular? I wonder that would be. My first job was at Reuters. It wasn't for the Newswire. It was writing on. There was a number of specifically tailored industry desks, and I wrote about advertising and marketing, and that was really the early days of the internet. So I think the big difference from then to now is how you would research something. It's so much easier to research everything you want to do now using either just Googling or using a LexisNexis or something. And thinking back then to maybe early times, not at Reuters so much, but early times in newspaper offices, I remember every newspaper would have a great library service. There would be people diligently cutting out your clippings, but also every clipping, so you could research something very much in the physical sense. And I think some newspaper offices had one internet terminal which was shared between everyone, so it was quite limited. This makes me sound ancient, by the way. It really wasn't that long ago. So I think actually how you research a story has become so much easier. I suppose that means that you have fewer excuses for not being thorough these days. And I think the thing that benefited from them is different because you go from junior to senior, so your view on how it works changes. But I think it feels like there was a lot more time, but a lot of people will say that to you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, James. I didn't want to suggest you came up in like the 1940s as a reporter, which people might have had that impression. Rachel, do you want to take the next question?
Well, I was going to say, could we sort of talk on those formative years in your entry into journalism in a bit more detail, just because I know that it's a subject of real interest to some of our listeners. I know you went to the University of St Andrews where you edited the student newspaper, and then you did a postgraduate degree at City. Could you tell us a little bit about both of those experiences and why you wanted to pursue the postgraduate route?
I think at St Andrews, I mean, there is a so with St Andrews, the die was cast. I think I was always drawn to the student paper. I had some passing interest in radio, but there was no student radio in St Andrews, quite a small town. And it's interesting when you're an undergraduate. I think your how would I put it? Your horizons expand, but you just get quite lazy. So I did go for a few times. I did go in and help out at TFM, which was the radio station in Dundee, which was a couple of bus rides away, and really I thought I just can't be bothered with this, and the student paper was there. It was a great publication, and I thought I really should be doing this. I mean, the Chronicle, as was in St Andrews, was one of those rare student papers because it had financial freedom. A lot of the big blue chip recruiters put ads in the paper, so that meant that we could run, and we didn't need the money behind us from the student union. We weren't beholden to what to what they were saying. So that was a really great time, and I'm sure I spent as much time in that office as I did doing my English degree. And then the question leaving St Andrews after 4 years, was how do I convert this? How do I turn this into a career? And the obvious direction is one of the postgraduate courses, those 1 year diplomas. And it was a choice between City and Cardiff, and I went towards City in London. And by that time, actually, because I wanted to try and stand out in the application process, I took it on myself to show willing, and I'd done a lot of work experience. So I did stints with the Herald in Glasgow, the Scotsman, the Yorkshire Post, and the South Wales Echo. It was kind of like a UK tour, if you like. And I just thought, these are great. I just need to stand out on this application for City because if it wasn't City or Cardiff, I didn't quite know what the plan was. And and it was all fine in the end.
Could you tell us about that experience of the City course? How useful did you find it? What did it cover? And how did it open doors to your next step?
I think it was there's a few reasons why it's incredibly useful. I think there is the learning of those skills that you absolutely groan about at the time. I mean, 9 a.m. shorthand, Monday to Friday from memory, was, it was something to groan about. But there was some of those writing exercises, the visits to the courts. There's one I remember actually, I don't think it was called the A to Z challenge, but it should have been, where each of us, I think there was 30 of us on the course, the tutor gave us a page from the A to Z and said, okay, just go out and get a story and see you in a few hours. And I just thought that was, as someone that didn't know London at all at the time, I think I ended up in Victoria Park, and there was, by the end of the day, there was something about botulism in the geese on the lake or something. That's what I came back with. So that was good. But I think you talked about the opening doors, Simon. I think that's very, very valid. I think there's the shared experience of going through something like that with 30 others, several of whom I'm still in touch with. And then I think there is the opening of doors, which I certainly don't think I had from the days back at home in West Yorkshire. And if people wanted to recruit then, and I would hope it's the same now, a lot of media organisations know they can go to City, they can go to Cardiff, and they can find somebody coming off that production line. And actually, it's through City, I don't mind saying, the Reuters job came up.
I hope the geese have recovered. I wondered as well, with your experience at local newspapers, helped in that regard in terms of finding stories maybe on a deadline, but also finding stories out of nothing, basically. I just think it was
it was nice to see, because I think the reason, the great thing about for anybody being in their 20s in journalism or younger is you sit in an office, when we sat in offices with people in their 40s and 50s who they might be a bit short with you, but that's their right. But even if you're just observing them doing their job, and every time anyone asks me about work experience, how to get it and what to do, I would always say, well, if you do get to go in somewhere, just try to be useful. Don't expect you're going to be on the front page, within a day or two. Actually offer to make the tea. I mean, that's a good way. It's absolutely not beneath anyone. Just be helpful and observe, and the rest just follows. I remember seeing the Herald always sticks in my mind. I couldn't work out why there were some of the chief subs and the news editors seemed to half of them seemed to disappear at about 4 or 5 o'clock, and the office then. I don't know which was built first, but there was kind of a pub encased in the office, and there was sort of on a they were kind of on a tag team going downstairs for a quick sharpener just to see them through to the first deadlines.
Could you tell us about the Daily Iowan? I think that's the pronunciation I've got. Your time in the US and what your both your experience in America and I suppose American versus British journalism really.
Well done for finding that one. That was a scholarship that the City University ran. So in the August break, I went over to the Daily Iowan for about a month, I think, which was great. And the Daily Iowan is kind of that hybrid student local newspaper. So it was staffed and run editorially largely by students from the University of Iowa, but there was a adult full-time business team behind it and advertising and so on. And bear in mind that the Daily Iowan is in Iowa City, so it's not even in the state capital of Des Moines. So you're really being thrown in. I always think the great thing about journalism, the great thing about press trips, can be you get to go to places that you would never otherwise go. So it was a real shock to the system, and they wrote. I think they're incredibly. I think we are in the UK, but the way they did it, there's almost a reverence to how they put the newspaper together every day, which I thought was really interesting. And they were curious about how we worked, how London was. I think this was around Britpop and so on at this time, so I had to write something about Britpop, and then they thought it'd be funny for the Brit to go and review the local Shakespeare play and to see if it cut the mustard and so on. Did it? I think it did for the purposes of that review. It was probably a good idea that it did.
And from there, it was to Reuters. What were you doing? You said you weren't doing the wire service aspect of it. What was your role there?
I did it a bit, but the main thing Reuters had at the time was a number of specialist news desks, which they sold news on a certain topic. So we're all gathered in the same area. There was air cargo, advertising, insurance, and a couple of others. They sold that alongside various database products. So it was a reasonably good entry to professional journalism, and it was writing about a lot of the companies and agencies out of Soho. But also there was an option to dig into things like the consumer trends and things. And it's actually those stories. I don't know. It might be how advertising was changing, or billboards were talking, or something that worked. And so much of the Reuters content was carried in newspapers around the world. So it's quite nice to come in some days and find there's a cutting from the Chicago Tribune on my desk or something. That something had obviously travelled.
Could you tell us about your stint? You had stints in Yorkshire and Glasgow and Wales before working at Nationals in London. Could you tell us about that, both in terms of your own experience and then kind of how that worked as a route? Because our sense is that historically that's what huge numbers of journalists have done, but a lot of those regional newspapers have had a lot of difficulty with finances and so forth. So what was that journey like?
Well, that was only work experience, those regional titles. So they were done in the holidays while I was at St Andrews.
Okay. I missed
so the first
end of that. Okay.
No, it's all right. So from St Andrews, it was the straight year at City, including the Daily Iowan, and then from there into Reuters. So I think you're absolutely. I mean, it used to be that great route from the regionals into the nationals, and obviously that's a lot more challenged now.
And when you moved back to Britain, you were part of the launch team for Business AM, which I think is the first attempt to launch a daily newspaper in Scotland for more than 100 years. Why did you get involved with that, and what appealed about it? And sort of related to that, you studied in English literature, but you started to write about the city and finance a lot more. I know you'd done some of that at Reuters as well. Had you sort of had to re-educate yourself and do lots of learning in your spare time, or had you sort of picked it up on the job?
Well, when I left Reuters after 18 months, it seemed, and actually, so rewind, the Reuters job was not first and foremost a financial job, although of course Reuters is a financial brand. So I got that, and then when I left Reuters after 18 months, it seemed to me the obvious thing was to go into that financial stream and write to city editors and so on. So, I mean, there'd been various shifts and stints at places like the Telegraph and the Mail on Sunday, and Business AM came up. I knew some people who were joining. I think there was something quite joyful about being part of a startup and helping to put it together. So I've always been based in London or surroundings. There was 6 months at Business AM I spent in Edinburgh, but largely in London, looking after their as one of their London team.
And could you tell us about how you made your way through the major national titles? So that you had a column at the Sunday Times, and then these executive jobs that you had at the Evening Standard and the Indie. How did that part of your career develop?
Well, after Business AM, which ran for 2.5 years and then effectively ran out of money, after that closed, I spent a year at the Scotsman, and I've written more about Scottish business than I ever thought I would ever have to have done. But it's always good experience. I mean, from that, I thought trying to be as proactive as possible. I thought, look, this is great. I really enjoy this. I need to get onto a national, which was the Daily Mail, and then after that, I thought I needed to test myself further. So that was the Sunday Times, a really great place to do that. And then I went over to be city editor at the Evening Standard and the Independent, and that was about running a team. So after I picked up that Reuters job on the notice board at City, I don't think there's ever been any. I've never got a job so easily as that, and every other time I've had to ring somebody up.
Across those different titles, how did writing for them vary in terms of voice, in terms of tone, in terms of the audience that you were speaking to? Did you, when you were writing the Inside the City column, for example, did you assume that you were writing to a very knowledgeable audience?
I think the style and the genre of business coverage used to be a great range of how business in the city was covered, and the Telegraph was a little bit old school tie, and the Guardian you would go to for coverage of environmental disasters because somebody's laid a pipeline across a piece of land that they shouldn't have done. I think over the years the coverage is as homogenized slightly. That's not a bad thing, but the coverage is they're competing with each other a lot more. You would imagine that something like, I don't know, the collapse of Arcadia, all papers would cover in a reasonably similar way, in a similar style. I think the things that I learned from those three, the Daily Mail was really it's quite a tight business section at the Mail, so I think there was something about word economy there. I mean, the lead story then, and the section isn't that similar now, so the lead story is about 350 words. Every word counts. I mean, you could easily fill it, but you've got to fill it as well as you can. And I think I learned from the people I sat between there really how you tease the best out of your interview subjects. There was a chap called Brian O'Connor I sat next to who does a wonderful impression of a stupid Irishman. He is anything but. He will sort of reel in the person he's interviewing, and they won't know until about 15 minutes in that actually he's read their last five financial statements and he knows they're running out of cash. So I think I learned a lot about how you operate on the phone and how you're very, very thorough there. At the Sunday Times, I think it's it's writing longer. I mean, their main piece in the city section is perhaps 2,000 words or used to be. So you can really stretch your legs a little bit, and you need context and colour. Is it a more informed audience? I'm not sure it is. I think actually the Daily Mail is very, very good at staying close to its readers. That's one of the secrets of its success over many years. So I remember when something like O2, the mobile company, was taken over, and we had letters from, there was a huge small shareholder base in O2 because it had been spun out of BT. And so a lot of shareholders didn't quite know what was going on, didn't know what their options were. And they wrote to us, and they wrote to me because my name was on the articles of that had covered it. And one of the lessons I learned there is you write back to every one of them. I actually called a few and said, look, this is what's happening. And I'm not giving you financial advice, but this is what is going to happen. So I think they're very informed, and the amount of correspondence was remarkable. Yes, so Sunday Times is the context and the colour piece, and really pushing and seeing, where are those stories, where can I break something for the weekend? A real strong competition to get on the front page of the business section. And then at the Evening Standard, there was lots to pick up there about how you run and motivate a team. But the beauty of the Evening Standard was one journalist, who's obviously feeling very poetic at the time, said it was like freshly fallen snow, and because we published before they did, we got to go out and write about the Marks and Spencer profit warning before they did. It's really, really quick analysis and explanation to quite a sophisticated city audience. And there's the beauty of the immediacy at the Standard. It's you write it, copy in by 11, edition gone by 12, on the streets by 1:32, and you can see somebody at night for a drink, and we like to know people read our stuff, don't we? So it's great that you could have that conversation about your column that day, that evening.
Could we talk about the Art of the CEO interview? You're a prolific author of these. I think more than 350 of them that you've done. Could you talk us really through the kind of process piece from setting it up to the access to how long you get, and then whether the demands, whether from the company and things like that? Really lift the lid on how that all works.
I mean, I think there's three things I think about when I'm doing it. I think what makes them work, there's something of the who, the what, and a little bit of it is the when. So I think these are great pages, these profile pages, and I think the people that run on them have to justify their existence. It has to be, why is this person important? It's partly why I'm drawn to business journalism in the main, is because I think the people who run the companies that are in our pension funds that in some way contribute to our quality of life and how we all work and how we will fill our time are as important, if not more important, than the top sports stars and the politicians and so on. So I think it's about, sometimes you can get, if you can land someone for an interview, this is the who. It doesn't really matter what they say. It's just great to get in the room. I've got a chat with Branson. I've got a chat with the governor of the Bank of England. That's great, I think. But quite often with the what, you're looking for someone that's going to say something surprising or revealing about their organisation or about a competitor and so on. So the setup is, I think it's different. It's different depending on which publication you're at, and it's different. I've worked for myself for 5 years. I've done about 50 of these in the last 5 years. So the extra question now would be, well, which title is it for, and so on. So I think there's often an ongoing conversation with, I'd really like to talk to X. How soon can we get them? And sometimes that conversation is with their people. And there have been lots of occasions when I've just emailed direct or spoken to people at parties and said, look, love to get you in the paper. Can we do a piece in the next few months or something? So it's good to have a lot of ongoing conversations. The time itself, I liken these to almost a smash and grab raid. I think an hour can be too long to talk. I know some of the big US long form publications will meet the CEO over 3 times over lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and so on. I'm very much a fan of get in there, probably 45, 50 minutes is optimal, and then get out again. And my view is, I remember doing a joint interview with someone. I mentioned this in the intro to the book. A joint interview is a shocking format, and I would never do this again. So it's 2 journalists sat in the room with one CEO. Obviously, the CEO's ego is at the max at that moment. And the other guy said, his first question was, "So what do you do then?" And I thought, oh, this is going to be a long hour. And so what I try and do is research them to death. I want to be able to use that 45 minutes absolutely the best that I can. I don't want to go in and say, well, so tell me about what Tesco does or something. It's a given. We know Tesco. I need to split the time, or actually need to split the write-up roughly between, I think a good profile for me is roughly split the words on the page, half about the organisation, half on the person. How did they get there? What are their motivations? And how do we dig back into their past? And I think the joy of writing some of these is pulling together. It's not quite psychiatrists' chair stuff, but drawing together the strands from across their life. So I interviewed, one example. I interviewed the boss of Sotheby's last summer, and he was interesting because this idea that an investment banker who was used to carving up all sorts of companies and selling assets to the highest bidder was now selling precious artifacts to buyers who were interested in antiquities and so on. And it was nice with him to dig up. I went back 13 years and found a conversation he had with his at his old school at Yale, when he admitted that when he was studying at Yale, he thought that I think he said that investment banking was would be a total waste of time.
In terms of structuring your interviews, do you try and warm them up a bit? Do you start with their personal life first and then get into the trickier questions, or do you go straight in and sort of the element of surprise, if you will?
No, I think there's a warming up. Talk about the issues in the company and the things they would expect to begin with, but I think don't dwell too long on all of that. There's something about letting them say what they have to say in the first 20 minutes and then get into the good stuff.
You mentioned this kind of doing your homework beforehand. Would you, once you've spoken to them, would you put in other calls to people in a similar industry, or would there be additional interviews beyond the primary subject, or is it mainly from the time with the boss?
I think most of these that I've done have been there's only one voice in the piece, which is the subject, the CEO. The exception to that sometimes has been the Sunday Times, where they like a corroborating quote. Sometimes, if the page is long enough, and that can be quite nice. Someone who can talk about their early life or how their career developed, or so on. But I quite often talk to people about. It depends. If I've met them before, then I might be more comfortable just going into an interview situation. But if I haven't, it's quite nice to speak to people who will know them, speak to the competition, and say, well, what's this? Where's this guy come from? Or where's this woman come from? I think that's interesting. Yeah.
Do any of the CEOs demand copy approval, or probably more likely their teams? Do they ask to sort of see the piece before you run it?
Oh, frequently. I mean, and the answer. Well, of course, that's easier for me just to defer and defray now because I work for myself. But the answer back when I worked for a paper was, "What do you think this is? Hello, magazine."
Seems properly robust there. Could we talk about the kind of tone you take with this, and maybe in the context of the Joe the Juice piece you sent over that was sort of interesting. Now, how do you sort of draw that line between it being kind of colourful, between it being a celebration or a sort of take the kind of language and the way you're making it? What are you conscious of when you're putting something like that together? maybe using that one as an example.
I think the great thing about business coverage, this is not just CEO interviews or anything. It's there's no reason it can't be. You wouldn't think you can necessarily educate your audience because they're a very educated audience, but you can certainly inform them, and I think there's no reason why you can't entertain them. And I think it's great when business coverage breaks out of business. Out of the business pages and onto the front page or wherever. And of course, business has done that increasingly since the financial crisis of 12, 13 years ago. So, I think they can be as colourful as any, sports interview or political interview. With Joe and the Juice, this is Casper Basse, and he was a gift. I mean, he looked terribly hungover. He didn't have this is I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago. He didn't have any hand holder with him, which was great because I don't think any CEO really needs them. I generally think the more babysitters in the room, the less important person this really is. So with Casper, it was great. I think he had 4 double espressos in the time we talked. He looked like a rock star, because the challenge you've got, and some publications don't like to dwell too much on the adjectives and the descriptors and let them talk for themselves, and the personality comes through in other ways. But sometimes it can be a challenge if it's a man and they're just wearing the boring suit and tie. But Casper was black leather jacket, lots of coffee, and very straightforward. And that's a good, open Scandinavian boss, as most of them are.
I know someone who was thrown up on by an interview subject, but I don't know whether that made it into the final piece. In terms of colour, I was thinking of your Kenyan gold miners story. I was wondering whether you could tell us a little bit more about that, because that's a real balance between the sort of interview subjects and the human impact of that trade, and obviously the bigger business story underpinning it.
Well, I sent you that one just to prove I do leave the office and leave the country sometimes, and that was I got to know Fairtrade, and this was a trip to Kenya with Fairtrade. They were trying to do for gold what they'd done for bananas. So how do you accredit gold right the way down the supply chain? And the answer is with great difficulty, but they were really having a good go at it. So we talk a lot about business and manufacturing and entrepreneurship, and it is hard and it's increasingly hard for reporters and writers, particularly if they're following the news cycle, to get out of the office and really kick the tires. And I really enjoyed this because it was an opportunity to see absolutely, literally at the coalface how business works. And also it was really about global economy, because here were what they politely call the artisan miners. These guys were down a very, very hot, steamy hole in the ground, scratching with their bare hands little traces of precious metals that the big mining companies had left behind when they'd all quit Kenya a generation ago. So I think to be able to tie that together in a piece, which was really helped by some incredible photography, back to the people who were buying gold wedding rings in Hatton Garden or whatever, I was really pleased with the outcome.
I definitely enjoyed that piece as well. I used to work in West Africa for Reuters, and I remember seeing a lot of artisan mining as well there, and it's pretty grim. There were 2 interesting points I wanted to ask about that. The first was the decision not to use last names with the local people. What was the rationale behind that? And the second was, how did the interface with the NGO work? Had they paid or the transport for the journalists to come out there and things like that? And how did you police that element of it?
I think I don't think I used last names because in most cases I just couldn't get them. I mean, it really was a whistle stop. There's no intent or angle there, Simon. It was just that I needed to be consistent, and I didn't have full names. And in terms of NGO, and the trip was funded by Fairtrade, which I think I hope was disclosed.
Can we move on now to your book, The 9 Types of Leader? What is the origin of the project? Why did you want to write it? And could you explain some of the terms that you use in terms of lovers and alphas and so on?
I've worked for myself for 5 years, and I had wanted to write my own book, and there were other projects and other work that had got in the way. And then I started writing books with other people, and I thought I really must get on with this now. And I had an idea that I'd been playing around with for a while, and then it was a question of finding a publisher. And in the end, I wrote 2 books in tandem, which, if anyone takes anything away from this podcast, is never do that. So I had this idea. When you've done a lot of these CEO interviews, you go through a lot of CVs, and they're all quite polished up to look good, and you're automatically looking for, well, hang on about, what was he doing for those 6 months, or why did she disappear for 2 years, or whatever. And other patterns emerge. So I think the first grouping I thought was very interesting is where do all these CEOs go first that gets them into the boardroom, 25, 30 years on. And Procter & Gamble kept coming up. Procter & Gamble, soap powder, shampoo, one of the big consumer goods companies. And there's a real group, I called them the golden generation, not to their faces, that trained up through the 90s at Procter & Gamble. And they've gone on to run Sky, the BBC, BT, Ralph Lauren, Levi Strauss, a load of them. So what was it that meant that if you were flogging shampoo when you were 23, that really prepared you to run these huge companies later in your career? So I collected, so it almost felt like the beginnings of my own happy families, of corporate happy families. So I thought, well, I've got these sellers here, and then there were other ones that emerged. So fixers, I'm a big fan of. So these are when companies go wrong, these are the people that rush in with their 100-day plans and say, fear not, I'm going to save this company. I'm going to renegotiate with the bank, / close all the shops, / do something else. And so they were a category as well. And so I thought of built up from there, and thought, well, the founders are obvious, and what else have I got? Lovers and diplomats and so on. And so I worked. My agent was very thoughtful on this, and I worked hard on the taxonomy, the structure, and got to 9. And I thought, that's it. Nine is a good number. And so then worked it up from there, and looked at who I'd spoken to in all those categories. Re-spoke to a number of them. So, for example, I knew Moya Green, who was instrumental in taking the Royal Mail onto the stock market. I mean, it is basically an insolvent company that somehow sold to shareholders and delivered a dividend and so on. And went back to her in one example and really talked through some of these moments of high drama when they ran. I mean, I think there were a few times, but she'd been in there a few weeks. Everyone was left the office on an August bank holiday, and one of her junior financial people said, "Oh, you realise, Moya, we're running out of money on Tuesday." So there was that, and then on top of that, I went to people I hadn't interviewed before if I needed to populate chapters like campaigners or humans or diplomats.
I thought the choice of 9 I was fascinated by. I have a friend who edited an anthology last year, and she had endless discussion about, was it going to be 8 pieces or 15 or 7, or what was sort of optimal for this kind of book. And how did you, when you were discussing with your agent and with your publisher, how did you kind of zone in on 9 as the number to have?
I felt it covered the waterfront. I felt it really felt like I could put most people into most categories. I do make the caveat in there that it's possible that CEOs can change in time, and it's also possible that you can get a mixed bloodline. Someone who's part diplomat, part seller, or whatever. But I felt they covered the bases.
In terms of your move to writing books, What was that motivated by? Was it the sort of shrinking newspapers, or was it financial? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, the first one came to me, and I did a book with someone that never quite saw the light of day. There's no sinister story behind that. It just never made it. And so I'd realised that I'd made that conversion to not writing 2,000 words, writing 80,000, and you can convince yourself it's not quite as horrendous as it is in some of the dark hours. And so there were more to come. I had an agent, and there were opportunities that came to us, and one of those was Footsie the Inside Story, which came out last November. So I think when I left the Standard in 2015, I always wanted to carry on writing, but I wanted to do. I was really open. I wanted to see if I could do other things as well, and I've fanned out across a number of things in the last few years. And I think books, it's just a different form of journalism.
Could we talk about your move to go freelance? Was that precipitated by what was going on at the Standard and the Independent with the stopping of print publication and so forth, or was it you deciding that you wanted a new challenge?
No, it was a good time to go, and I left before. I can't remember the chronology exactly, but the Indie was certainly printing. It was printing as I left the building, and no, I think I'd done 4 years there, which was my longest job, amazingly, and it felt like a good time to try everything else out there.
It's a rule of the podcast that we talk about how writing interfaces with people's financial life. What's the division of your income now, and be as specific or as vague as you like, between writing and your public speaking and conference work and corporate work and everything else?
I always know when you say it's a rule of the podcast, you are going to ask the money question, by the way.
Yes, I know we've not come up with different ways of introducing it yet.
I think you should shock people and ask it first. I think, look, I am still doing newspaper journalism. My journalism has broadened into books, and I do a podcast as well, which brings in revenue through sponsorship. So in the last couple of years, more than half of my income has been journalism in all its different flavors, if you like. Obviously, writing with other people is better than writing. Can be better than writing on your own. And then the other part of the activities you've alluded to it. It's been good. I've tried to cultivate it, and I've done a lot more in events and conference facilitation, and that's switched pretty much from in the room to webinar stuff. And there is also advisory work in there now, and a non-exec role I got a few months ago. So it's I liken it to spinning plates.
And while that seems to be very much the experience of a lot of freelancers we've had. Again, with this thing where you're writing journalism, but you're also doing some consultancy work and media training and so forth. How do you patrol the boundaries between that? I saw, for example, on your website you said that you won't profile someone you've trained, which seems very sensible and things. How do you manage that one?
I think that was worth pointing out. I think. I try and keep it as separate as possible. It is there is a huge sea of CEOs to interview, and I'm upfront with everyone I write for about about any conflicting interests I might have. Some people would say I'm a little too thorough, but I don't want to be caught out. We're all I've got to protect my reputation.
We're sort of coming towards the end of our time, so I wondered if I could ask you about Oscar's Book Prize. Could you tell listeners a little bit about that prize and how it came about?
Yeah, of course. So Oscar's Book Prize is the nationwide search for the best preschool book of the year, preschool or picture book. I tell anyone that we're in Gruffalo territory with this one. We're just going into our 8th year. And we are supported by, we have various people who help us with that. The Evening Standard helped us launch it. Amazon, the National Literacy Trust, and Princess Beatrice is our patron. And it was set up in honour of our son who died, who we lost in December 2012. And Oscar loved books, and we wanted something that acted as a legacy for him. And the longer we get into it, we think this is a great area. There's so much in the press about child obesity, and I really think child literacy is such a huge issue. I think it's something like 25% of kids start primary school and they're behind. They can't read well enough, and pretty much 25% are still behind at the age of 11, and it's quite possibly the same 25%. So we want to celebrate the brilliant books. I think something like 1 in 3 books sold in the UK are kids' books. That's why you have a huge hall full of them at Waterstones in Piccadilly. And we also want to gently encourage parents to spend a bit of time with their kids, share a book, and it's never too early to fall in love with books.
Great. Well, we'll draw this to a close there, James. But thank you for being such a great guest and really educating Rachel and myself on a whole news section of the writing world for Always Take Notes. And we wish you all the best with your projects going forward.
Thank you.
Hello, it's us again. I'm going to rejig the format of this outro, Simon, because, the cringy, pointless talking about whether we enjoyed the interview, and obviously we did, format might not be working for some of our listeners. So instead, I'm going to ask you
for 2 of our listeners, Rachel.
I'm going to extrapolate and say all of them. But what is one takeaway that you have from the interview with James?
The one thing I thought was very interesting was his sort of bish bash bosh approach. Maybe that's the wrong way to characterise it, to his CEO interviews. Like, doesn't want to spend too much time with them, just in there, 45 minutes. A very kind of self-contained art form, really. And I thought that was it's very different to what I do, but an interesting, very time efficient and kind of just distinct way of doing things. And he's clearly a real pro at it. What about you, Rachel?
Well, unfortunately, you've sort of stolen mine. But I wonder whether when you interview people then, Simon, do you want 3 days worth of their time? You want to really know what they have for breakfast?
I usually want a week, and I want to attach myself to them like a limpet and hang out with them and then talk to 25 people they knew and stuff like that. Yeah, that's kind of my style. But it's a different thing, and his I think he's clearly very good at getting to the heart of the matter, as it were, with these people.
When I did an interviewing course, we had to practice, crafting an interview with just 10 minutes. What you'd ask someone really high profile in 10 minutes, and how you write your questions, just get to it. So James obviously knows exactly how to do that, whereas I'm not very good at that.
I just sort of flashbacks of being at university, and I think the first interview I ever wrote, I had 10 minutes with Benazir Bhutto, and I wrote this sort of spectacularly ill-informed piece that it was not an edifying entry into journalism, really. So I'm still haunted by that. Anyway,
but not so haunted that you haven't failed to bring it up. So well done. I almost admire that.
Poor Benazir. Anyway, Rachel, what have you been up to?
I have been sort of spinning lots of plates at the minute, but at the moment I'm working on a piece about period dramas, which should be very fun. I'm just trying to wrangle interviews myself actually at the minute. So yes, I'll be working on that, and hopefully it will be coming out in a couple of weeks. So yeah, how about you?
I have been trying to wrangle hospital access for a COVID story, which is okay, but tricky. I've finally closed my Runner's World story on blisters, which is very good, and it's got some fun illustrations, which I'm looking forward to seeing. Yeah, sort of busy, but working hard. Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acombe.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvin. Our graphic design is by James Edgar, and our score is by Jess Danheiser.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Always Take Notes, on Twitter at Take Notes Always, on Patreon at Always Take Notes, and if you'd like to leave a review or get in touch with us, please do.
Many thanks. Goodbye.